Could you start by telling me your name, who you work for, and a little bit about your job?
Yes. My name is Dr. Tony Farrell. I work for the University of British Columbia. I hold a position in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems, and that position is the Canada Research Chair Tier 1 for Fish Physiology, Culture and Conservation.
How long have you been involved with the BC salmon industry?
I've been involved with the BC salmon industry for probably 10 years now. I got hired at UBC to actually be directly involved with the salmon industry from the perspective of my research expertise, which is fish physiology.
What policies and regulations have most significantly impacted your work within the BC salmon industry?
The policy that's perhaps most affected my work has been the one that restricted the growth of aquaculture, as in net pen aquaculture, in the BC environment. The rest of the world has been growing in aquaculture of fish species. It recognizes the fact that agricultural land is diminishing in amount rather than growing in amount, whereas the world population is growing. We no longer catch any more wild fish than we've ever caught. And the increase in demand for fish has been met by aquaculture on a global scale. BC met this demand from '86 to about 2000 and put a moratorium. The second policy that changed the landscape for me was the interest in closed containment aquaculture, so not open net pen farming, but actually controlling the water quality of where the fish live and not releasing any of that wastewater in any large quantities to the environment.
How has your personal role evolved within the Vancouver food system?
I'm a producer of wastes.
Do you try within your job, or do you see ways within the BC salmon industry to reduce waste?
The waste within the net pen aquaculture system are reduced quite effectively. They use dilution primarily, and they monitor wastes regularly. Any waste food is lost potential profit margins, so they tend to minimize the amount of food that they feed the fish for the maximum growth, and so that means less waste. They do, as a vertebrate, fishes produce fecal waste and urine waste, or the equivalent of urine waste, just like you and I. And just like you and I, we shove it down the toilet, dilute it with some water and throw it out in the environment. So the aquaculture industry is no different to what we do with human wastes.
What significant changes over the past 40 years have impacted your work most significantly?
This is the work on fish?
Within the fishing industry, yeah, or within your interest?
I think there's been, in 40 years, which is most of my research life, there's been an increased consideration of fish conservation, because we're actually taxed the wild fish to limits and even beyond limits in some places. And I've seen significant improvements in conservation, both in habitat protection and overfishing. And the other one is the growth of aquaculture industry to what I think is moving towards a sustainable model that we should all be proud of. I think most people that go into places like Costco to get fish will get some wild fish, and they'll also get farmed Atlantic salmon, which is, I just got back from London, UK, and I know I either had Irish, Scottish or Norwegian Atlantic salmon, and I just took one look at it and said, no thank you, I'll wait till I get back to BC. It is such a superior product.
What exactly brought about your work an interest within fishing research?
I love doing research on fish, and it's so fishes my model system of interest. I've probably worked on over 100 different species, from fishes that breathe air to fishes that have no red blood cells in their body, to fishes that tolerate very high temperatures, to fishes that are from the poles. And so that diversity fascinates me, how an animal does that. But fundamentally, I try to understand how animals work, and my specific interest is in how hearts work, and how fishes in these very, very diverse environments have a cardiovascular system that allows life there. So a basic life support system in an animal that lives in a huge range of environments, and that's the fascination for me. And fisheries and aquaculture are kind of offshoots, just like aquatic toxicology would be an offshoot in terms of the toxicant world. What's killing the fish, what's not killing the fish.
Is there anything about salmon in particular that interests you? Or they're just another fish?
If you've ever watched what a salmon does in its life, it's just a marvelous example of sheer determination, stamina to get back to its spawning grounds. When you see that for the first time, it just gives you this powerful impression of what nature is all about, that you can give it all and give your life trying to get to that goal, because many of the salmon don't make it, most of the salmon in fact don't make it back to the spawning ground. Sockeye salmon, female, produces about 3,000 eggs on average, and to sustain that population, just 2 have to make it back. Hopefully 1 male, 1 female.
What do you see as the biggest challenge to the sustainability of our current food system?
I think it's a topic that David Suzuki has not challenged. It's a topic that most environmentalists don't challenge, but we continue to have too many children, and I'm guilty of that.
Tell me about your work specifically. Is there any aspect of your work that you feel touches on issues of sustainability?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the sustainability for me is taking a desirable food product and minimizing the ecological footprint on the planet. And by minimizing the ecological footprint, you can attack the problem in several ways. One is the very infrastructure that you're using, or the food that you're using. You can use materials that are more sustainable. For example, BC has committed to aluminum smelting. Aluminum is a very durable product in a marine environment, so build it out of aluminum. Pay the heavy price up front for something that is recyclable and can be or go for trees. But if you build trees, they won't withstand, as the early people in pioneering aquaculture demonstrated, they can't stand the storms out there. So there's one good example. 2 principles slightly different. Another principle might be, we love salmon to eat in the Western world, not so in Asia. That love of salmon acknowledges the fact that they're a carnivorous fish. You don't have to be entirely carnivorous. So some of the work that's been done at this university and is world class is to look at feeding salmon diets made of Canadian produced canola. And so what you're doing is taking the food of a carnivorous fish closer to the sun in plants. You can't do it 100%, and that's because there are some basic elements of the diet that have to be included that through nature, salmon, and for that matter humans, require as essential. So there are essential nutrients that have to be included, so you can't go to 100% herbivorous diets on salmon. So that's two examples.
How does the salmon industry affect food security and sustainability in BC?
Enormously. Absolutely enormously. Pacific salmon, if you want to eat Pacific salmon, only come back in the fall. So you can catch them, you can feast on them, and then not feast on them for the rest of the year. Or you can freeze them and you can pay for the freezing, which has an energy cost, it has a carbon footprint, which is huge. Or you can produce fish that can be harvested on a daily basis, and within 3 or 4 days can be delivered to a supermarket fresh, chilled, but not frozen. And you get a year-round supply of fresh, not frozen fish. And so it just makes sense to do that.
What are the greatest factors and influences surrounding sustainability issues within the BC salmon industry?
Food supply for the fish is probably number one. If you can secure food supply, then number two will be changing environment. And so we know that water temperatures are going up. We know that certain sites are not particularly good. Water comes up that's very low in oxygen in the fall, and so they prefer not to be in those sites, and other sites might be better. But perhaps the overarching one, from the point of view of the industry and talking to the industry, is that there's a large group of people that really do not understand the industry and what it stands for and what it does. They believe in hyperbole. People tend to believe in hyperbole rather than facts that are out there. So a large effort of the aquaculture industry now is to educate the public. People can make up their minds on what they want to do with the information, but at least the information is out there and it's correct information, because lies have been told.
Well, could you talk more about the misunderstandings about the BC salmon industry?
Oh, there's many examples, but I'll give you one in particular. The one in particular concerns a disease or a parasitic disease that is natural in fish, and that is sea lice. So sea lice exists on many fish, and when you incubate, when you bring domesticated animals in close contact with each other, they spread diseases and incubate diseases rather well. And you ask any parent what happens as soon as the children go back to school in September. They get diseases. Why do they get diseases? Because they're in close proximity to each other and they spread them amongst each other. So salmon farming, or any farming for that matter, is no problem. A problem was discovered on wild fish where there was sea lice on a large number of fish, and it was suggested that the wild salmon population would collapse because of parasites coming from the farm fish. This proved not to be the case. In fact, the information that was being put out was a little wrong, and again, people at UBC did some basic science, showed that one sea louse does not kill a tiny baby salmon. It wouldn't be evolutionarily stable to start off with. So, I mean, it was flawed from a fundamental biology reason, but we had to demonstrate it, quantify it. And that we did. And as soon as that information was circulated around, the misinformation disappeared off the website where it had been for several years.
What do you think the biggest milestones have been over the last 4 decades within the BC salmon industry?
That's an interesting question, because I was just at a gathering of some old guys who were reminiscing about the past 40 years. and if you could see what they did, it's incredible. I mean, what you have now is you can walk into Costco and for a good price you can get almost pure protein, not a bone in it. High quality, good digestibility, tastes good. You can flavor it any way you want because you've got lots of oil, fat in it. And that's where we are today. 40 years ago, where we were is we had logs that were boom chained together with a tarpaulin hung between the logs, and they would fly bucketfuls of fish larvae in, and that was the advent of aquaculture in British Columbia. The biggest transition in British Columbia to move it to commercial scale was that all these mom and pop industries, which were largely being done by people who had very little information. We knew nothing about how to culture fish in high intensity at a commercial level. The bank said, when will you give us a profit? And the banks wanted quarterly reports. The problem is that when you take a baby salmon that's about this big, and you want to take it to a market size of minimally this size, it takes about 2 years. And I am not going to get any profit for 2 years. And sure, there was a lot of people that were not doing very well, and they were losing a lot of fish because a tarpaulin between a bunch of logs is not very good. But the bankers basically called in the loans. Norwegians came in and said, we'll buy all these places at 10 cents on the dollar, so they were bankrupt. And that is why we have a dominance of non-BC based or BC managed farms in BC today. Is banks called in loans.
To continue with that topic, would you say that these non-BC, or what would you say the effects are of having a non-BC based management system in this industry?
It's an issue.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. We get somebody to invest in BC. We get somebody to hire BC people for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
As long as these big, larger corporations have a true local representation. And I would challenge anybody to go up to the local offices and talk to some of these people. They are so darn proud of being BC, of the quality of their product,
Mm-hmm.
that when they say things like, what happens in Chile and what happens in Norway and what happens in Scotland doesn't apply to British Columbia. It comes from the heart because they know they care about their environment. These people live in some of the most pristine parts of the world. They need jobs, they have jobs, and they're proud of their pristine environment. You just have to talk to these people and you'll see. And so, has it been a win-win situation? Well, it's been a win-win situation in terms of job creation and food supply in BC.
Mm-hmm.
Our largest agricultural export that's legal,
Mm-hmm.
I am excluding cannabis, is fish.
Mm-hmm.
So agriculture in BC, biggest dollar at the gate is fish. It's got nothing to do with agro. It's
Mm-hmm.
everything to do with water. And the sooner we start realizing that and realizing that we have an immense amount of water in British Columbia, we can actually start developing this in a sustainable way in an expansion mode. And I think that the time is starting to happen where this could actually happen. So who will bankroll it? It depends whether some of the rich people in British Columbia will bankroll it. And if you check some of the owners of the fish farms, Jimmy Patterson's group is one of the richest people in Vancouver. He deals with catching wild fish. Has anybody watched the Vancouver Canucks?
Mm-hmm.
Who owns them? Check out whether they own aquaculture operations.